This is the story of Dominic Shaw and his wife Rachel Shaw. They had built their life the way people build houses in a hurry, functional, structurally sound, but without the patience that detail requires. Dominic was a man who loved the idea of family more than its daily weight, who had married Rachel at 29 because she was steady in the way he needed steadying, and who had confused that steadiness for simplicity. Rachel, for her part, had loved him with a kind of careful devotion, the sort that does not announce itself but shows up, quietly, in 1,000 unremarkable ways. Between them lived an unspoken agreement. She would hold things together, and he would be grateful. He was not always grateful. The tension that would eventually undo them was not born from cruelty or betrayal in the conventional sense. It was born from the slow, grinding arithmetic of a man who felt trapped by the very life he had chosen, and a woman who had made herself so invisible in service of that life that she had nearly forgotten she existed at all. The kitchen in the morning had its own grammar. Rachel moved through it the way she moved through most things, with economy, with purpose, with the particular silence of a person who has learned not to take up too much space. The coffee was started before Dominic came downstairs. The oatmeal was on the stove, low heat, the way he liked it. Leo was in his bouncer on the kitchen floor, 7 months old, and already fascinated by the light that came through the window above the sink, his small fists opening and closing at nothing. Dominic appeared in the doorway at 7:12, still buttoning his cuff. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that had once been open and was now, gradually, incrementally, closing. He worked in commercial real estate, managed mid-sized accounts, traveled for work perhaps once a month. He was not a bad man. That is important to establish early, because the worst damage is rarely done by bad men. It is done by ordinary ones who choose comfort over honesty again and again, until the choosing becomes invisible even to themselves. "Morning," he said. "Morning." Rachel didn't turn from the stove. "Coffee's ready." He poured himself a cup and stood at the counter, scrolling through his phone. Leo gurgled. The light shifted. Outside, a neighbor's car reversed out of a driveway. These were the sounds of their life. Not unpleasant, not unwelcome, simply present, the way furniture is present. "He sleep okay?" Dominic asked. "Up once, around 3. He went back down. You should have woken me." Rachel turned to look at him then, and her expression held something that was not quite a smile and not quite its absence. "You had the Harrington meeting today." Dominic looked up from his phone. "That doesn't mean—" "It's fine, Dom. It was fine, that was the thing. It was always fine." Rachel had constructed fineness around herself like a system of levees, holding back not floodwater, but the slow seepage of her own needs, her own exhaustion, her own want for someone to ask, not just whether things were fine, but whether she was. She served the oatmeal. Dominic sat. Leo reached for a hanging toy and missed, then tried again. The morning moved forward the way mornings do, indifferent to what is or isn't being said. Their friend Marcus came by that evening, Marcus Hale, who had been Dominic's college roommate and remained 15 years later, one of those people who is somehow always comfortable in other people's homes. He arrived with a six-pack and the energy of a man with no particular agenda, which Rachel had always found either charming or exhausting, depending on her reserves. She liked Marcus. He was one of the few people who ever spoke to her directly, who looked at her when she was talking rather than passed her toward whatever came next. "How's new parenthood?" he asked her, settling onto the couch while Dominic went to find glasses. "Honest answer or polite answer?" Marcus grinned. "Always honest." "It's like being chronically jet-lagged and also in love with someone who doesn't speak your language yet." "That's the most accurate description I've ever heard." "Don't tell Dominic." "I said that." Marcus tilted his head, just slightly. "Why not?" She didn't answer. The question hung in the air for a moment, unremarkable on the surface, and then Dominic returned with the glasses and the conversation shifted to football and mutual friends and a conference Marcus had attended in Denver. Rachel sat with them for an hour, laughing in the right places, refilling snacks without being asked. Later, after Marcus had gone and Leo was down, Dominic stood at the sink rinsing glasses and said, without particular weight, "You seemed tired." "I am tired," Rachel said. "You should rest more." She looked at the back of his head, the familiar curve of his neck, the way his shoulders held tension even when he was relaxed. And she thought, with the quietness of a door closing in another room, he means that kindly. He thinks that's enough. She said, "Good night, Dom. Night." She turned off the bedroom light. The house settled. Leo breathed through the monitor. Outside it had started to rain. It is possible to share a bed with someone and be entirely alone. It is possible to have full conversations about grocery lists, pediatric appointments, weekend logistics, without once saying anything real. Dominic and Rachel had become fluent in this, though neither would have named it. To name it would have required a kind of honesty that cost more than either of them, in those months, was willing to spend. Leo was 9 months old when Rachel first admitted to herself that something had gone wrong, not in the way of crisis. No single event, no argument she could point to, but in the way of drift, the way boats drift from docks when their lines are improperly tied. She was folding laundry on a Tuesday afternoon, Leo asleep in the next room, and she realized she could not remember the last time Dominic had asked her what she was thinking. Not about logistics, not about the baby, about herself, her interior life. The parts of her that existed outside of being his wife and Leo's mother. She held one of his shirts, blue cotton, soft from washing, and felt, briefly and terrifyingly, nothing. At dinner that night, she said, "I've been thinking about going back to work." Dominic looked up. "Leo's not even a year." "I know." "What would you even do? Who would watch him? There are daycares, Dom. Other people use them." Something crossed his face. Not anger, something more complicated. Worry, perhaps. Or the particular discomfort of a man whose domestic arrangements are about to change in ways he hasn't sanctioned. "I just think," he said carefully, "that it's worth waiting. We agreed when I was pregnant. A lot has changed. Has it?" She looked at him. Yes. He returned to his food. The conversation did not continue. Rachel had once worked in nonprofit administration, coordinating volunteer programs for a mid-sized community organization in the city. She'd been good at it. Better than good. She'd had a quiet authority that people responded to, a capacity for logistics and warmth simultaneously that made things run. When she'd become pregnant and they talked about her leaving, she had told herself it was temporary. She had believed it. Now she was not sure what she believed. She called her old colleague Diane the following week. They talked for 40 minutes, longer than Rachel had talked to anyone in months, and when she hung up, she sat in the car in the parking lot of the grocery store and allowed herself, for 2 or 3 minutes, to want things. It was not a dramatic moment. It was quiet and a little painful, the way it is when a numb limb begins to feel again. Marcus came by again that Thursday. Dominic was working late. He was often working late now, or saying that he was, which Rachel had noted without yet deciding what to do with. And so it was just Marcus and Rachel and Leo on the living room floor, Leo pulling himself toward a stacking toy while they talked. "He seems like he's almost walking," Marcus said. "Another month, maybe. He's determined. He gets that from you." Rachel glanced at him. "You think? I've always thought that." He paused. "Dom's more of a, he thinks big, but he waits for things to come to him. You actually move?" There was a silence. Leo succeeded in grabbing the toy and waved it triumphantly. "Marcus," Rachel said slowly, "do you think Dominic is happy?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. Not uncomfortable. He was rarely uncomfortable, but considering. "I think he doesn't know what he is." "That's not reassuring." "I know." She picked up Leo, who immediately grabbed for her hair. "Do you ever wonder?" She stopped. "What?" "Nothing." "It's stupid. Say it." She hesitated, and then something shifted in her expression. A brief, strange flicker, as if she had become momentarily aware of something beyond the room. She looked up, not quite at Marcus, not quite at anything, and said in a slightly different register, quieter and somehow more direct, "I don't know. Maybe like this story or subscribe or something? Marcus stared at her. She blinked, looked back at him. What? He said. Sorry. She shook her head, pressing her lips together. I don't know why I said that. He watched her for another second. Then, are you okay? I'm fine. But her voice had found its usual key again, the moment already receding. I'm fine. I was just… Never mind. She set Leo down. He reached for the toy again. The ordinary world resumed its shape, but Rachel did not forget the feeling. That brief sense of having been witnessed, not by Marcus, not by Dominic, but by something she could not name. It was not frightening. It was, in its way, a comfort. The feeling that what was happening here mattered, that it was being held somewhere. That night, Dominic came home at 9:30. Dinner was in the refrigerator. She was already in bed. He ate alone. It happened in late October, 11 months after Leo was born. Not with shouting, not with slamming doors or thrown accusations. That was the thing about real endings. They didn't announce themselves the way stories suggested they would. They happened in kitchens, on ordinary evenings with leftovers on the stove and a baby monitor flickering green on the counter. Dominic had come home from a trip to Chicago, 3 days, a development project, a dinner with clients. He was tired in the particular way of someone who has been performing himself for an extended period. Rachel was tired in the way she always was. They had the particular quality of two people who had been apart long enough to remember they were strangers in some fundamental way. I need to talk to you, he said, after she'd poured him water and he'd sat down. She sat across from him. She noticed he hadn't kissed her when he came in. He often didn't anymore, but she noticed. Okay, she said. I've been thinking. He turned the glass in his hands. About all of this? All of what? He made a vague gesture. The kitchen, the monitor, the house, the life. Rachel felt something cold move through her. Dominic. I don't know how to say this without it sounding… Say it. He looked at her. His face was doing something complicated, a man trying to be honest and also to protect himself, which are often mutually exclusive. I feel like I made a mistake. The words sat between them. What kind of mistake? She said, and it was not a question. He exhaled. I don't know if any of this is what I wanted. I thought it was. When we talked about the baby, about you staying home, I thought it was what I wanted. But I feel… He stopped. Tried again. I feel like I can't breathe, Rachel. She was quiet for a long time. When you say this, she said finally, voice careful even, do you mean us, or do you mean Leo? He didn't answer immediately. That was the moment. That hesitation. The fact that he had to consider the question. I mean all of it, he said. I think I mean all of it. I'm sorry. Don't. She held up her hand, not angrily. It was almost gentle. Don't apologize and then leave the sentence where it is. I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to say what you mean. Another silence. Leo made a small sound through the monitor. Not crying, just shifting. They both looked at it reflexively, then back at each other. I think, Dominic said slowly, that I wanted a different life. I don't know what life. I keep feeling like this one is a mistake. He closed his eyes briefly. I didn't mean it like that. You said it like that. Rachel, you said they were a mistake. Her voice was still even. That was the most frightening part. She was not crying, not breaking. She was holding herself with the practiced composure of someone who had been preparing for this without knowing it. Leo is in the next room. He's 11 months old. And you just told me that he and I didn't say that. You made a gesture, Dom. You gestured at all of it. He put his hands over his face. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a car moved slowly down the wet street. I don't know what I am, he said finally, which was perhaps the truest thing he'd said in months. Rachel stood. She moved to the counter, stood with her back to him, looking at the small framed photo above the sink, the two of them at the lake, the summer before Leo, her head tipped against his shoulder, laughing at something. "I'm going to stay with my sister," she said. "I'll take Leo. You don't have to. I know I don't have to." She turned. "I'm choosing to. There's a difference." She looked at him for a long moment. "I hope you figure out what you want, Dominic. I genuinely mean that. I just can't wait here while you do." She left the kitchen. He sat alone with his water glass and the monitor's green light and the weight of a sentence he could not take back, and he felt, for the first time, not trapped. He felt something worse. He felt that he had wasted something precious and hadn't understood its value until the precise moment of its ending. 18 months passed, the way time passes after loss. Slowly, then in sudden virtues, as if the world occasionally loses patience and decides to skip ahead, Dominic stayed in the house. He had expected that to feel like freedom. It felt mostly like furniture. He rattled around the rooms with the particular unease of a man who has discovered that he'd been blaming his circumstances for something that lived inside him. The silence he'd thought he wanted pressed on him differently than he'd imagined. It had no texture, no warmth. It offered no resistance. He went to therapy. Not immediately and not enthusiastically, but eventually in the way people do when the alternative is simply to continue suffering without understanding why. His therapist was a small, soft-spoken woman named Dr. Amara Collins, who had the rare gift of asking questions that didn't feel like accusations. She did not tell him he was a bad person. She asked him, with some consistency, why he had conflated love with captivity, why the presence of people who needed him had felt like walls. He didn't have clean answers. That was the work of the year, sitting with the lack of clean answers. He saw Leo on a schedule that Rachel's lawyer had structured with cold precision. Wednesdays, alternating weekends, Leo grew. He began walking, then running, with the indiscriminate joy of someone newly in possession of legs. He said, "Da," at Dominic, and Dominic felt it like a hand around his chest. He was slowly learning, a man who didn't love his son. He was a man who had not known how to be loved without feeling consumed, who had experienced intimacy as threat, warmth as a form of erasure. These were not excuses. They were, Dr. Kurzel. Collins would have said, simply the material he had to work with. Rachel did not contact him except through the logistics of co-parenting. Her messages were polite and efficient. She did not express anger. He would have found anger easier. The efficiency of her communication said, "I am not in pain about you anymore. I have moved on to other, more important things." He heard through Marcus, who maintained a careful neutrality that Dominic respected and resented in equal measure, that she had gone back to work, that she had joined something or started something, he wasn't sure which. "She's doing well," Marcus said, and his tone did not invite further inquiry. Dominic told himself he was glad. He was glad partly. He was also, and this he admitted only in the careful hour of Dr. Collins's office, afraid that her thriving was evidence of something he didn't want to look at directly. That perhaps the life she'd been living with him had been the smaller version of her, that he had taken up space where she should have been. This was, Dr. Collins noted, a more useful thought than most he'd had. He took on more with Leo, began to learn the grammar of his son, when he was tired versus overstimulated, which books he'd want read 3 times, the specific way he needed to be held during thunder. There was a rightness to this that Dominic had not expected, a kind of returning to something he hadn't known he'd left. He was not a perfect father. He was a present one, which was what he could offer, and he was learning that presence, actual, consistent, uneventful presence, was a form of love he had never been taught to value. The self-deception, when it came, was quieter than he expected. He began to construct, over months, a version of events in which his honesty had been a kindness, in which saying "I feel like I'm suffocating" had been brave rather than brutal. He didn't fully believe this version, but he visited it sometimes, the way you visit a room that is not quite comfortable but feels necessary. Dr. Collins dismantled it regularly. "You said they," she pointed out once with the gentleness of someone removing a splinter. "You included your infant son in that sentence." "I know. That's not something that goes away because you've grown." "I know," he said again. But he was growing. That was the complicated truth of the aftermath, that the damage and the growth existed simultaneously, that becoming better did not undo what had been broken, that he could love his son clearly now, could see the outline of his own failures with something approaching honesty, and none of that retroactively made Rachel whole. One Tuesday evening in late spring, he drove past a converted building on Clement Street he'd never paid attention to before. A banner out front, hand-painted, slightly uneven, "The Branch," a community center for single parents and families in transition. He slowed without intending to. There were lights on inside. Through the large front window he could see a room in use, people at tables, a coffee station, what looked like children's art on the walls. Someone had put a small herb garden in pots along the windowsill. He drove on. But he sat in the parking lot of his destination for a long time before going in. He went back on a Thursday. He told himself he wasn't sure why, that it was curiosity, proximity, the half-formed idea that he might volunteer somewhere, contribute something. He was aware, in the way he was becoming aware of his own patterns, that these were the rationalizations of a man who had a specific reason and was reluctant to name it. The center was warm inside. Not performatively warm, not the aggressively welcoming atmosphere of places that needed to prove their welcome, but the particular warmth of a space that has been used genuinely. There were children's drawings at eye level and adult height shelves above them. A corkboard near the entrance held a patchwork of business cards, resource flyers, handwritten notes. A woman at the front desk looked up and smiled with the measured openness of someone trained to assess without making people feel assessed. "Can I help you? I saw the sign. I wanted to learn more about what you do here." "Sure, we have open hours on Thursdays. You're welcome to look around. There's coffee in the back." He wandered. A cluster of women, some with strollers, one visibly pregnant, sat in a circle near the windows, deep in a conversation he didn't try to catch. A man about his age sat alone at a table with a laptop and a paper cup, the focused stillness of someone navigating a bureaucratic form. In the corner, two children built something with wooden blocks under the loose supervision of a teenager who was simultaneously scrolling her phone and redirecting them with impressive peripheral precision. He heard Rachel before he saw her. Her voice, low, unhurried, threading through the ambient noise of the room, was coming from a back hallway. She was talking to someone, a man Dominic didn't recognize, and what he heard was, "That program specifically. But we're applying for the county grant in the fall, which should let us expand the childcare hours by at least." She came around the corner and stopped. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She looked, he thought, exactly like herself. That sounds insufficient as an observation, but it was not. There was a quality to her that had been, he understood this only now, partially submerged during their marriage, held below the surface by the sheer administrative weight of being his wife and Leo's mother. What he saw now was the rest of it, the bearing of someone who had built something and knew it, the particular calm of a person who was doing the right work. "Dominic," she said. "Hi, Rachel." The man beside her glanced between them, registered something, and said, Just let me check on the afternoon group," and excused himself with tact. Dominic was grateful for. Rachel moved to the coffee station. She poured herself a cup without hurry, and he understood this was not avoidance. It was boundary setting, the small, deliberate act of someone who had decided how this conversation would go before it began. "How's Leo?" she asked. "Good. Great, actually. He's starting to talk a lot. He said garbage truck yesterday, and I genuinely celebrated." A small, real smile moved across her face. "He's obsessed with that garbage truck. He hears it from 3 blocks away." "I know." A pause. He looked around the room. "This is yours. Mine and a few others. Diane from my old job, 2 people I met through a single-parent network. We incorporated 18 months ago. Marcus mentioned you were doing something. He didn't tell me what. I asked him not to. He absorbed this. It was not unkind the way she said it. It was simply true. Rachel, he said carefully, I've thought a lot about, I've been in therapy for over a year. I know it doesn't change what you said. No. I know. She looked at him over her cup. Her eyes were steady. Not cold, not warm, simply present. The eyes of a woman who has done a great deal of internal work and is no longer willing to do it on behalf of other people. Leo talks about you, she said. He loves his Thursdays with you. That matters. I know it does. That's where I'd like things to stay for a while. Co-parenting, making that work well. He had been prepared for this. He had told himself he was prepared. And yet standing in front of her, in the space she had built from nothing, surrounded by evidence of what she was capable of when no one was absorbing her energy, he felt the particular vertigo of a man confronted with his own failure, not as an abstraction but as an architecture. I understand, he said. Do you? It was not a challenge. It was a genuine question, asked with the directness of someone who had learned the cost of letting things go, unnamed. I think, he said slowly, that I understand more than I did. I don't think understanding is the same as it being okay. She nodded. That seemed to be the right answer, or at least an honest one. You should come to Leo's things, she said. School stuff, birthday parties, whatever he wants you there for. I'm not interested in making that hard. Thank you. That's not generosity, Dominic. It's just what's right for him. He felt the distinction land. He was meant to feel it. He looked around the room one more time, the corkboard, the herb pots, the children building something in the corner. The accumulated evidence of a woman who had taken the wreckage of a particular kind of dismissal and built something load-bearing from it. Not for revenge. That was the thing he had perhaps expected and did not find, not to show him. Simply because it was the next true thing she knew how to do. This place is remarkable, he said. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. She simply looked at him with the calm of someone who knows what they've made and no longer requires outside confirmation of its value. He left. Outside, the afternoon light had gone pale and thin, the way it does in late autumn, falling flat against the sidewalk without warmth. He stood at his car for a moment before getting in. He thought about Leo, about the garbage truck, about the particular way his son reached for him now with both arms and an expression of uncomplicated confidence, as though there were no question that Dominic would be there, would hold him, would not drop him. He thought about what it costs to become the person a small child believes you already are. He got in his car. He didn't go back to the center. Not that week, not the next. He filed what had happened carefully, without drama, in the place where he was slowly assembling an honest account of himself. He was a man who had said something unforgivable, and had to continue living inside that knowledge. He was also a man who loved his son clearly, and was learning to say so. These two things coexisted without resolving each other. Rachel's face stayed with him for a long time afterward. Not the expression of the woman he'd sat across from in their kitchen, tired and effortfully fine, but the face he'd seen today. Unhurried, complete. He had thought for a long time that she had needed him. He understood now, with the delayed clarity of a man who has finally looked at something directly, that she had only needed someone to stop making her small. She had done the rest herself. Some things do not end, they simply become the past, permanent, irreversible, and exactly as true as they always were.